Like, okay, let's see if we
Yeah,
can
I'll
make
start
it.
recording.
Okay, sorry. So I'll go back one and then they can see the, whoops, in theory, there you go. So in terms of talking about pests and cut flower operation, this is a little bit like Pests 101. And hopefully I'll have some information even for people who have been growing cut flowers for a long time. And maybe some of those people will have real specific questions. And if you're just getting started, it gets a little overwhelming when you start thinking about all the possible things that could happen. So you won't get them all in 1 year, but you'll get some always. So this, I said, this is welcome to my world because this is what the question that I got this spring. And this spring, we have had lots of rain, and consequently, we've had quite a few peony issues. So they're going to start out sort of easy. Does anybody know what this is? And I might put down also, put in the note here. It's, I like getting people, have people contacting me and saying, I've got issues and sending me pictures. So put my contact information at the beginning. I've also got it at the end. So does anyone want to put in chat what they think this might be? I suspect this person, and I'm not saying who's got it, but I suspect this person is not the only one to have this issue. Thank you, Celine. Yep, Celine Hagan knows that's botrytis. So that's botrytis on peony. And I mean, certainly makes the foliage ugly. That may or may not be a problem if you're growing peonies. If you're not using much of the foliage, maybe foliage spots is not a big deal. It is something you want to think about. Okay, how are you going to manage this and maybe reduce this? Okay, so now here, whoops, what happened to our, where are all my pictures? Oh, there. I must have moved something around. Oh, sorry. Anyway, we'll see botrytis. I'll wake up here in a minute. Oh, oh, it's bouncing around on its own. So you can see on this slide, this is a, wow. Maybe it's not just me. This is very strange. It seems to be moving on its own. And anyway, so here you can see the foliar symptoms, but you can also have botrytis on the stems and on the flower buds. And so you'll get this kind of browning on the flower buds and on some of the petals, and the sepals. You can also see browning down on the bottom of the stems, and this sometimes will cause the plants to actually fall over. In a greenhouse, we're more often we're more likely to see this kind of gray, fuzzy mycelium, which is why it also gets called gray mold. Outside, maybe not as much. You might see it down on the base of the stems where it's really humid. You've got a lot of plant material down there, and so it keeps it humid, and you might see the sporulation. What you might also see if you look down there is these black things. They look like mouse droppings, and they're called sclerotia. And that's what falls onto the soil or in the debris will end up in the soil and will give you botrytis starting in the soil at the very beginning of the season. So it's not that it has to come in on wind currents and land on the foliage. It's actually right there to begin with. And that can be a problem in terms of continuing with botrytis year after year. So you want to take, I don't know what's going on, but we'll try and keep it under control. So you want to make sure you take all the foliage away and the plant material away. So these sclerotia that are on it are not left in the soil. And then also do as much as you can to have good airflow. So I'm not really talking about management, but in this one I did a little bit. So, but then I got these pictures also, and this is a little tougher. And I don't actually think these two things are the same. So when I look at this, and why I said this is welcome to my world, because I can't say immediately, oh, I know exactly what this is. If I look at this one on my left when I'm looking at the screen, that looks like somebody was chewing on it. Is it a caterpillar? Is it something else? We didn't see anything there, but that looks a little bit like chewing. This one, and I'll show you some more pictures that look a lot like this, where this is split, that's something else. It doesn't look like something was chewing on that, and I wouldn't expect necessarily that it's a disease, although it could be associated with botrytis. In this case, oh my golly. In this case, you can see how much it's splitting down the stem. The other thing that's interesting is that the petals look like they're no longer attached at the base. This looks to me, if I was guessing, which I am to some extent, like it might be too much water, because what happens sometimes is a plant will grow and it forms those outer sepals And then when it takes up a lot of water, all of a sudden, when there's a lot of water on the soil, the inner parts are trying to get bigger and expand, and the outer parts can't. And so you'll get a split. You can see that in tomatoes. You can see it in cherries with too much rain. I don't quite know what's going on, but we'll try and control it. And so I don't know for sure. But then just on Monday, I was there and we opened these buds up and we saw bright yellow. I don't know what species they are, but they are clearly thrips. Thrips run fast. They were in under the petals. And so there's definitely thrips in there. Whether or not thrips cause it, I don't know. This kind of damage is more typical of thrips where they actually take the cell contents out. So you can see a change in color. You'll see it on foliage or on petals. This is some information from Alaska on thrips on peony, and I apologize, it's not a very good picture, but you can see some damage on the petals that's more browning. It looks almost more like botrytis than this kind of damage. So it may be that that damage is caused by the thrips. I just don't know. But that is the kind of work that we're always doing when we're trying to identify what pests are out there. It's like detective work. So if I start out like identifying insect and disease pests, not with pictures of pests now, but just kind of what you need to do to be able to start identifying what you've got. And the first thing is you have to keep an eye out. And I wanted this to be an easy list. We get very gung-ho. I talk about scouting a lot. And so we get all these pages of information on scouting. Let's make it easy. Keep an eye out. So when you're doing something else, if you see a plant that looks a little funny, mark it. You might want to get something like this marking tape or flagging tape, and you might want one with stripes on it so it's easier to see in a cut flower field or something really bright neon. You can also use flags, anything so that you don't have to take all the information, then you can come back. But the other thing then is also checking back as you go, next time you go by to see what's going on, and then noticing patterns. So that's kind of a simple overview of what you might do for a scouting, but let's add a little bit more information. I already did, but also keeping an eye out. Do you have somebody that works for you that's really good at noticing differences or really good at seeing things? Have them be the one, or make sure that you empower them, that when they're out in the field, that they're noting anything, and give them their own flagging tape. And then who's out there? Whoever's out there is the person you want looking, because they're already there. You don't have to have a separate scout. You don't have to have a separate scouting plan. Sometimes that's a good idea, but in this case, to make it easy, it's like, just make sure that everybody's looking at the plants as they go by. Marking what you notice. Then most people have a phone in their pocket, so take pictures. And take more pictures than you think you need. Take a picture of the plant, take a picture of the damage, take a picture of the field. So if you can see a pattern, we can look at that. You might want to come back and check, because we want to know whether the problem is increasing or spreading from plant to plant. Is it all on the same species? Is it on different species? Or is it not there anymore? In which case that you don't have to worry about it, but it's still worth keeping track of it and making sure you noted it. And then we're always going to look at patterns. And if you send me a picture, I will probably write back an email that says, okay, is that just a cultivar, a single cultivar out of several? Is it just a single species, or is it multiple species? Is it just part of a field, or just part of a row, or just part of a plant? Those patterns are all going to help determine what it is you've actually got. Getting some magnification is my favorite magnification picture ever. We use it all the time. It was a couple of students who took a greenhouse scouting school with us. Those are called optivisors. They're handy because you can put them on your head and they're hands-free. I don't know that I've ever seen anyone in the field of the one, but it's something to think about. But at least a hand lens and or maybe a little handheld microscope that you can then take if you're taking plant materials into the space where you can actually look at them under a little microscope. Those things cost about $30. They're pretty cheap. You can get some good hand lenses for 10. So it's definitely worth having some type of magnification. And then keeping records always. So seeing it one year is always worth writing it down so that you know to look for it again the next year. And also then you know what you did and whether or not it worked. Again, what were the patterns, but also what was the weather. So if someone just said, oh, yeah, I've got a lot of botrytis in my peonies this year, and didn't think about the fact that it's a very wet spring, so maybe the next year is going to be a dry spring, so you wouldn't expect to see it as much if you knew that connection. Then sometimes once you've got that, you can do a little research. For example, you can go, it's not that easy to find a lot of information on cut flowers, but it is out there, and it's something that I think for we're trying to work on putting together some resource sheets for different species. But go look and see what you can find online, especially from universities. And then even research articles. Here's one on susceptibility of 46 Lisianthus cultivars to fusarium crown and stem rot. So if that's a problem you have, then maybe you would get a resistant variety the next time around for when you're planning for next year. This thing I thought was interesting because I was looking up, okay, how do you take notes on your cell phone? Most people probably know already, but they have various apps that you can get that make it easy for you to take notes on a cell phone. And if that's what you've got out with you when you're out there, that's what you should put them on. Okay, let's start talking pests. So I'm doing insects and diseases. I'm not doing much in the way of I'm not doing anything on weeds, and there are other pests you can have, but there are plenty just within diseases and insects. And I didn't make it up to a dozen, but that's okay because we want to actually get through this today. So I just picked some of the ones that people see fairly frequently to give you a little bit of information on how you might identify it if you see it too. So let's start with damping off, just because it might start in the seedlings. And so you can tell there are some plants that are certainly hurting. There are some that are completely dead. What in this picture might tell you what part of the problem is? Does anybody want to put that in the chat? Caroline's smiling like she knows it. If you look at these cells, they look kind of green, right? That means there's algae growing on them, and it also means that they're overwatered. Yep, too much water. Thanks, Kirsten. And so it's not the too much water that's killing the plants, although you can kill plants with too much water. It's just that it's so wet that the fungi are really, really happy. So this is usually a fungal disease, a fungal root. In some cases, the same organism would give you a root rot. And so some of it's the roots that are being killed off, which means the plant can't take up that water. And then sometimes you'll see it growing up a little bit farther up the stem. And often, so if you've planted your seedlings, if you're overwatering them, you'll see this kind of a thing. And so we always like people to be err a little bit on the dry side. And when you've got seedlings, as long as you're not letting them wilt from lack of water. But though there are other things that can look like damping off, and they're not diseases. So that's another thing, is sometimes things look like diseases that aren't. So if you had too much fertilizer, you might burn the plants. You've burned the roots, and therefore they will wilt because they're not getting any water. You might have too much or too little water. It might be temperature. And so we're always looking at patterns. So if it's a disease, you saw how random that was. There were some good looking seedlings and some that looked awful. That's kind of an indication that it's a disease. If it was something like fertilizer or water, you would expect that to be true of all the seedlings in the flat because they've all been treated the same in terms of fertilizer and water. It's not always true, and sometimes it's like, okay, I watered really well, but you weren't watering really very well on the edges. They tend to get less water, and so again, you'd look at a pattern where you saw the edges were wilted, but the center was all fine. Might indicate something that wasn't a disease. So here's one of the usual suspects. This is powdery mildew, and it's one of the ones that we sort of think is easy to identify. It's usually white on the upper surface of the leaf, and so this is a peony powdery mildew. It coats the peony one sort of coats the whole leaf, and some of them you get just spots. And if you look at them closely with magnification, you can see that they're fuzzy. There's mycelium growing there, and it's always on the upper surface. Now, if you saw it on this zinnia flower, you might not immediately say that that was powdery mildew. You don't see any of the mycelial growth really. And it might be that if you took this flower and put it in a warm environment in a plastic bag with a wet paper towel, then you would start seeing mycelium grow on it. So in some cases, it is easy to identify powdery mildew and sometimes not. I would expect that if I had a flower that looked like this, I would also be seeing the symptoms on the foliage, and that would give me a hint as to what was going One of the things about powdery mildew in some species of flowers, this is verbena, which isn't a cut flower, but there is resistance. You can see these, the two sides, those varieties are susceptible and they're smaller and don't look as good. This one is a more resistant variety. And so if anything that you can find a resistant variety for, if it has the color and form and so forth that you want, it's certainly worth um, putting, especially if you know you have this problem consistently, it's worth getting a resistant variety. Downy mildew, I don't think we see anywhere near as often in cut flowers, but I put it in here because it's another one of the mildews. Downy mildew, the fuzzy bits are on the bottom side. You do see symptoms on the top surface. This one's an interesting one because it turns it purple, but more likely it'll, oh my word, more likely it'll be yellow. And so then when you flip it over and look underneath, you'll see this fuzzy whitish grayish mycelium, and that tells you it's downy mildew. So the next one, I'm going through some of the ones that when you see them, you pretty much know what you've got. And rust is another one. It's well named because you'll get these orangey, reddish, sometimes orangey brown bumps, raised bumps. Usually the bumps are on the lower surface. You can see here on the upper surface, you'll usually see something yellowing or something that indicates you should flip it over and look at it. Oh my word. I don't know what's happening. It's Wednesday. And so again, it's unsightly and sometimes can be a lot of rust pustules on the backside, really causing the foliage to be unusable. You can see it on sunflowers. You can even see it up on the petals on sunflowers. Monarda is another one, snapdragon. There are some resistant snapdragons. And one of the other things that can happen is Malvaceae. So we have some weeds that look like hollyhocks because they're related to hollyhocks. They can also get it and they can be a reservoir. So that's one place where weed removal can actually help you with disease management also. Has anyone ever seen, you could just note in chat, if you've ever seen a rust disease. They're relatively easy to identify, but they're not as common as, say, powdery mildew, in my experience. Then we get into leaf spots, and leaf spots can be really, oh, yes, on crocosmia. Okay, thanks, Jenny. And on sunflowers, yeah, in Kansas. Leaf spots are, there are many diseases cause leaf spots, and some of the ones are iconic for that crop. So black spot on roses is a fungal leaf spot. If you've got a rose plant and it's got black spots on the leaves, you probably have leaf spot or black spot on rose, and then you can go from there. This is a Rudbeckia, and there was one that was like the All-American Plant of the Year that got this kind of leaf spot. It's a totally different organism than gives you the leaf spot on the roses. But this one, and we start looking at things like, the spots are kind of angular, like the veins prevent them from moving from place to place when we're identifying that it's this is anthracnose leaf spot. But this Rudbeckia, there are a lot of varieties that get it. So if you had a leaf spot on a Rudbeckia, you might assume that it was this fungal leaf spot, and then go from there to figure out how to manage it. However, there are also bacterial leaf spots, and some of them look almost identical. Coneflower and Rudbeckia both get bacterial leaf spots as well, as do many other things. Pseudomonas and Xanthomonas are two of the ones that we see. In some cases, they can be easily spread from plant to plant, not as much when they're outside, but sometimes in the greenhouse we have that issue. And so how can you tell the difference if it's bacterial or fungal? And maybe the question is, why would you want to know? Well, the reason you'd want to know whether it's fungal or bacterial is if you're using a pesticide, a fungicide to control it, you need to know that because different ones will work on fungi than work on bacteria. One of the ways you can tell, sometimes this works, and when it does, it's pretty cool. If you cut through a leaf that has bacteria in it and get it in a drop of water and have a hand lens, you can actually see the bacteria coming out of the vascular tissue. So it's both creepy and cool, like many things in horticulture. And so that would indicate that you have a bacterial disease. If you take the leaf material that has those spots on it, and again, put it in a warm place, in a moist environment, like a plastic bag with a damp paper towel, and go back and look at it after a while. And if you've got anything that's fuzzy and growing on it, or sporulating with black spores, you won't see the spores usually, but you'll see the mycelium, then it's a fungal one. It's not bacterial. So it helps if you're now asking somebody else to say, I have leaf spots, I did this, and I saw bacterial streaming, or I do see mycelium on it when I incubate it. That will help get an answer as to what you've got. I also feel like I'm going very fast, and also there's a lot of things to cover, but hopefully it's okay that we're going this quickly. And if everybody's hair is standing on end, someone will say that in the chat. So viruses and viroids are another one that is fairly common, partly because there's so many. And what a lot of the way that you tell that you've got a virus is it gives you a pattern. You can see on these leaves, some of the patterns are beautiful. And in fact, a lot of the tulips that have color breaks, it's actually a virus that causes that. Same thing on some gladiolas. And some of those fabulous tulips that they used to talk about in the 1700s, when people were buying them for hundreds of dollars, were actually virused. And so you can still see them in various other floral crops as well. So they often have names like ring spot and mosaic that tell you something about what they're going to look like. And some, I mean, we're not interested in tomatoes. I mean, if you're using the foliage, then a virus disease is a problem. If you're getting something like a stunt, it's also a problem because your plants are going to be a lot smaller. And so it is not always something that people like immediately say, oh, I must do something about, but they will also spread depending on what's spreading them. And it could be you that spreads them from plant to plant. And so you might want to think about how to deal with it. So this is not a picture that I took, but I did see also in the peonies that I was in the other day, I did see some that I'm like, that looks like a virus. And so this is tobacco rattle virus. I don't know if that's the one I was seeing, but you can clearly see that there's the pattern on the leaf. The other thing you can see is it looks like the plant on either side does not have it. If this was a plant that I had, and this is a perennial crop, so it's not going to go away, and it also isn't something you could treat, I would take this plant out. And I would take it out, and I might not put another peony. Well, it's not going to be soil borne, so you might put another peony back where it was. I would also, but I would remember where I took it out, and I'd keep track of these other plants nearby to see if they're starting to show the symptoms. I would also go and find out what spreads it. So it could be spread by an insect, it could be spread by handling. And especially if it's one spread by handling, I would be more likely to take it out. Here's another one just to show you that, whoops. This is one that's called a stunt. This is kind of a terrible picture, but you can see how much smaller a chrysanthemum plant is. You can see some patterns here on the leaf also. This looks like the upper side of a leaf with downy mildew, sort of, or it could be a fungal spot, but it's the stunting in this case, which is really going to cause the problems for you as a producer of cut flowers. All right, we'll take a breather for moving from diseases into insects. If anybody has something that's okay, I don't see anything in there, so I'll just keep going. So caterpillars, most people know what caterpillars look like. There are some things that look like caterpillars that aren't, but for the most part, if you see it, it looks like a caterpillar, it is. And they have chewing mouth parts, so it's, especially when they're this big, it's pretty easy to see where they are and what they're doing. You don't always see them, but here's something that's it's skeletonizing it. You get this kind of window pane effect because it's not a very big caterpillar, but as it gets bigger, these will be holes. You can see here, it just took off the top layer, then it gets bigger and starts going down all the way down to the upper epidermis. Sometimes you'll see them just in the flowers, and sometimes you'll get some malformation of the flowers because they were feeding on one side and not the other. And so usually, if you see it, it's like, okay, I know that's a caterpillar. And then you can figure out what to do with it. You may or may not know what kind it is, but you can at least see it and take pictures. Sometimes you don't see them because they're feeding at another time. And sometimes they're just hard to see. So can anybody see the caterpillar in this plant? And so at this point, if you were out, this is a petunia, so you're not really going to have this, but if you were scouting something like this or just out there working, you wouldn't really know there was anything going on. And it may be that that caterpillar is not going to make enough damage or feed enough to really make it a problem. That's where it is. And so it's the same color as the foliage and it looks a lot like the foliage. So you may not notice that you've got a caterpillar problem until they're actually feeding sufficiently that you see the damage. And that's kind of true of most insects also. Now this is one where very rarely do we actually see the caterpillar. This is a cutworm and it does this amazing job. I mean, it's obviously got good sized teeth because it just cuts it right off. I've had people think it was mice, but this usually feeds at night. So you'll have these beautiful little seedlings. You'll come back and they'll be not just chewed off. They're all tipped over. And so that's an indication that you've got cutworms. And so again, you might need to do a bit more sleuthing to make sure that it is indeed cutworms, but it's a hard one to see actually doing the feeding. Here's another one that makes it a little bit difficult to see the feeding. This stem has been sliced in half, as is this one. This is European corn borer, which can be a problem on dahlia. And so it's inside the stem. So you will not see the larva, and it's an egg that's laid. A little teeny caterpillar chews a hole in and goes inside and starts feeding on the inside of the stem. You might see the frass coming out of the hole that it went in. You might not even see that, but what we might see is that the plants all tip over, and when you pick them up and look, you'll find out that the whole inside of the stem has been hollowed out, and so they can no longer support the weight of the flower. It's also, once it's inside there, it's very difficult to do any kind of control. And this is one, again, where if you clean up the stems at the end of the season or till them in, the pupae stay in the stem. So if you leave the stems there, then you've got the problem ready to go the next year. If you remove them, and maybe not even compost them, remove them so that they're not there for the next year. It'll help reduce the problem. So there's thrips again, and I showed you some pictures of thrips. This is just to give you an idea of how small they are. This is a thrips in a flower. This is an open flower. They also feed on pollen, so they're often up in the flowers. And one way you can tell if you've got thrips is actually to tap the flower over a white sheet of paper, and you'll see them, they'll fall out. Sometimes you breathe on the flower because it makes them go to sleep, essentially, the carbon dioxide. Tap it and you can see them. Once they start moving, they run pretty fast. And as I said, this is the more typical damage where they've fed and they've taken the contents out of the cell. And so as they do that, they take the chlorophyll, and then these little black spots are fecal material. So the combination of sort of the silvery and the black fecal material on foliage or on petals is an indication that you've got thrips. Some thrips will cause this kind of malformation, especially if you get them early on and they're in the seedlings. They're feeding not on pollen because there isn't any yet, and they're feeding on the foliage, and some of them have toxic saliva, so that when they feed on the plant, it actually gets this malformation. Zoom and PowerPoint, some issues going on. So another one that comes up pretty often, and I wouldn't be surprised to find out that this year is a good year for slugs and snails because they like it moist, is slugs and snails. Now, if you just saw this chewing, you wouldn't necessarily know that it's not caterpillars. It's a little different in that a lot of times you see feeding around the edges as well. It's usually good size holes. I don't know. It's usually good size holes, but the thing that you might see is slime trails. And so the snails and slugs will leave slime behind where they've been. The other thing is they're generalist feeders, so they'll feed on almost anything. And so if you see feeding on a lot of different plants, that'll kind of give you an idea that it might be slugs and snails. But again, because they feed at night, you might not see the snails or the slugs. And then beetles. We have many, many kinds of beetles. Some of the favorite ones here, I know everyone loves Japanese beetles. I know people love tarnished plant bugs. If anyone's still trying to grow lilies, you probably don't like lily leaf beetle very much. And then this is a flea beetle actually on broccoli. But so beetles also give you feeding damage. They have teeth. And so here's Japanese beetle damage. again, a little bit more rough edged than some of the caterpillar feeding I've seen, but you wouldn't necessarily know if you didn't see the beetles right there. They tend to be in groups, so sometimes it's easy to see them because you've got a big group of Japanese beetles, and sometimes they're feeding in one area and they're not, you don't find them all around, and if you can control them in that one area, you don't get too much spread. This is an example of flea beetle feeding, and it is one that is kind of iconic in that it's often round and small, and they often don't feed all the way through the leaf. So if I was looking at either solanaceous crops or brassicas, and we do have some cut flowers that are in those groups, I would think this might be flea beetle. They do feed during the day, but if you disturb them, they'll hop away, and they're good jumpers, and so you might not actually see them. This one on the other side is one that we get calls on almost every year from gardeners because they think they have a disease. This is four-line plant bug damage, and it's almost always pretty easy to identify. It's quite round. Sometimes you'll get a big mass of it and you'll get a whole area that's turned brown or black. This is what the adults look like, and you may or may not see them. They like things that are in the mint family, but they'll feed on a lot of different stuff. And so often when you start seeing, you see these little individual spots that are more separated. It's always an advantage if you see it when it's not so much of it, because then maybe you have a chance to do something about it. They come in pretty early and then they're done. So later crops you may not see them. May not see the damage even on the same species that they fed on earlier. And aphids are quite popular. They're very popular amongst themselves in that many aphids are don't need to mate to form new ones, and as we say, they're born pregnant. And there's some kinds where you can see the eye spots of the next generation, and in that next generation, the next generation is already there. So it's easy to go from one aphid to a lot of aphids if you've got the right conditions. And again, we'd like to see them before we get to this stage, because at this stage, it's unsightly. You're probably not using the plant material that has this many aphids. They don't often carry, they can, but they don't carry that many diseases. And sometimes you can have a lot of aphids on a plant and not really see any damage. So if you can get them off, you can knock them off with water. Sometimes they won't all make it back up on the plant, so that can help. And some of them have alarm pheromones. So if you scare one, they'll send out a smell that makes all the other ones fall off, which helps. When the populations are really high, you'll see them with wings. And that means that this one's it's got wings because it's going to go off and find another plant to move to because there's not enough to eat on this one. Sometimes when you're looking, you'll see things that's like this, all these little white bodies. They're actually cast skins from the aphids that are up here above them. And sometimes it's easier to see that than it is to see the aphids. You might also see honeydew on the leaves. And so this is an aphid producing honeydew. It's basically sugar water, because when they're feeding in the phloem, they're getting a lot of sugars and not as many proteins, and they need the proteins as well as the sugars, so they excrete the extra sugars. And then you can also get a sooty mold growing on that sugary surface. And you'll also get wasps, and you might also get ants. So again, this is more of an aesthetic issue than it is of the fact that it might actually kill the plant, but it can still be a problem in cut flowers. This is another one that people don't talk about as much, but we see some issues with leafhoppers, and we keep hearing some issues with leafhoppers. So I thought I would put it in. This is a particular one called aster leafhopper, and the aster leafhopper you might not even see much, but what you might see is this. This is aster yellows, which is a viroid, I think, carried by that aster leafhopper. So when it feeds on the plant, it infects it with this viroid. So here's one that shows the stunting in the echinacea. And so these plants are not infected. This is also echinacea, and it's not supposed to be green. And so we're more interested in that leafhopper for what it can carry than for what it does in and of its own feeding. And so it's just so when when you get something like this, you'll know that it's a viroid, and again, that's a plant that it's not possible to cure the plant, so you might want to take it out. Same thing here. This one, this is in a landscape, but this one isn't going to do anything for you. We also have something, this is also in coneflower. This is called coneflower rosette, and it's a mite that causes this. And so sometimes people confuse them. You don't really want either of them. But this is the one that's carried by it's a phytoplasma, not a virus, sorry. It's the one that's carried by the leafhopper. Now, since it's changing for me, we might as well just go on. This is a potato leafhopper, and these are bright green. And they're, again, they move pretty fast. I had someone calling me about something on a tree, and when I saw the damage, I think it's maybe one of these leafhoppers, and they said, oh no, we didn't see anything jump, we saw something fly. But you might not notice the difference. So you might see the leafhoppers, but you might not. And what you might actually see instead is what's called hopper burn. So when they inject their saliva, it damages the plant tissues and causes it to look like it's burned. So you'll get some yellowing, you'll get some, oh my goodness, you get some stunting, and it can look like excess fertilizer sometimes too. And there's a bunch of different cut flower species that will get it. And we see it a lot, and this comes a lot in alfalfa. So if you have a field of cut flowers that's near an alfalfa field, you might actually see potato leafhopper. This is just the little nymph, the younger one. And this is kind of what the hopper burn looks like. And so again, you wouldn't necessarily see this and say, oh, I have an insect issue. It's just sort of burning the tips, and it's usually the tips that are burned. That tells you that something's going on, and then we'd start looking to see if we could find leafhoppers. So that is a very rapid run through, but I wanted to have enough time for people to ask questions, because I know that there are specific issues that people are probably interested in, and I will see if I can answer them. But also, here's my email again and my phone number, so if anyone wants that. All right.